Good evening, everybody. Today is April the 6th, Monday, and this is a Moscow City Regular Council meeting. And ladies and gentlemen, there's not very many of us in here in this particular room. There's 7 of us, but we're all going to rise, and I'm going to lead us in the pledge, and anybody out there on Skype or Video Land can join in with us if they'd like. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before we get going too far here, this is for our city clerk, Lori, who is on Skype with us. Lori, besides myself, we have President Brandy Sullivan here, Vice President Art Betke, Sandra Kelly, and on Skype with us is Maureen Laughlin, Ann Zabala, and Gina Teruscio. So you can put those into the record, please. And with that, the first thing that I have on my agenda here is a proclamation, and this is Fair Housing Proclamation. Whereas April 2020 marks the 52nd anniversary of the passage of Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, commonly known as the Federal Housing Act, and whereas discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in the sale, rental, leasing, or financing of housing or land to be used for the construction of housing or in the provisions of brokerage services is prohibited by Title VIII of the 1968 Civil Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988 expands coverage to include disabled persons and families with children. And whereas the Idaho Human Rights Commission Act has provided discrimination in housing since 1969, whereas the city of Moscow has determined that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and or generation identity or expression shall be prohibited pursuant to Moscow Code, City Code, Title 10, Chapter 19, in order to help ensure that all persons are afforded equal opportunities in housing. And whereas equal opportunities for all, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, national origin, or sexual orientation and or gender, identity, or expression is the fundamental goal of our city. And whereas equal access to housing is an important component of this goal, as fundamental as the right to an equal education and employment, and whereas housing is a critical component of family and community health and impacts our children's access to education, our ability to seek and retain employment options, the cultural benefits we enjoy, the extent of our exposure of crime and drugs, and the quality of health care we receive in emergencies. And whereas the laws of this nation and our state seek to ensure such equality of choice for all transactions involving housing, and whereas ongoing education, outreach, and monitoring are key to raising awareness of fair housing principles, practices, rights, and responsibilities. And whereas the mission of the city's Fair and Affordable Housing Commission includes researching, analyzing, and recommending to the mayor and council ways in which the city may further fair housing practices. And whereas only through continued cooperation, commitment, and support of all Idahoans can barriers to fair housing be removed. Now therefore, I, Bill Lambert, the mayor of the city of Moscow, do hereby proclaim April 2020 to be Fair Housing Month. And the city of Moscow, and I urge all citizens to support programs and policies that prevent or eliminate discriminatory housing practices. And with that, I will move on to our first item, which is the consent agenda.
I move approval of consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Art and a second by Sandra to approve the consent agenda as is. And I'm going to take roll from those on Skype, and I'll start with Maureen. Maureen, did you have your voice on? I couldn't hear you. She said aye.
Yeah, aye.
Okay, Gina Teruscio.
Aye.
Ann Zabola.
Aye.
Okay, and then I'll start inside here, Sandra.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have 6 aye votes on that, and we will move on to our very next item here in just a minute. And that will be item number 2. And what item number 2 is, ladies and gentlemen, Well 10 Development Phase 2 bid results and contract award. We got Scott Bontrager with us this evening. Scott, you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes, you've got the
Okay.
floor, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, before you tonight is, as the mayor had said, was Well 10 Development Phase 2 bid results and contract award. So this particular project's been going on for quite a number of years, starting with the acquisition of the property. The property that is used for this well site is up there on the western end of A Street, just west of Walmart, next to the LDS church up there. In 2016, we had a contract with a driller to drill the well, and the well itself is a little over 900 feet deep. This project was designed and put out to bid. This will take care of doing the actual development of the site. It'll install essentially the pump house, all the components and everything to basically start producing water from this well site. This well site will be the biggest one in the city. It'll be able to produce over 300 gallons per minute, and when running, it can produce up to 60% of the needs of the water in Moscow. So this project was put out to bid, and we got 3 bids in. We opened bids on March 17th, 2020, and the bids ranged anywhere from $2,590,000 all the way up to $3,097,290. And the engineer's estimate on this project was actually $3,284,850. So the bids came in pretty good. Of the 3 bids that came in, one was found non-responsive. That was the one from Quality Contractors. They were missing some paperwork. So with this, of the 2 remaining bids that had all the paperwork and everything correct on their bids, the city's staff is recommending that TML Construction, that we award the contract to them in the amount of $2,857,280 and authorize staff approval of construction change orders in an amount not to exceed the 10% of the contract amount, or take other action as deemed appropriate. I don't know if you have any questions for me about the project.
Okay, questions for Scott? Art, Betke?
Just to refresh my memory, Scott, does the motor for the well have the variable speed motor on it, as we discussed previously in some of our other meetings?
I'm sorry, Art, I could barely hear you.
I'll-
Microphone's out there, Art.
So to refresh my memory, in the past, we discussed having a variable speed motor on the well pump. Is that going to be the case for this?
Yes, this does still have a variable speed motor on it.
Brandy
Yep,
Sullivan.
this is Brandy. So I noticed in the packet that the quality contractors had, even prior to being notified that they were missing some of the elements, that they sent the letter requesting a withdrawal of their bid. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, they
Okay.
had.
So regardless, just out of, I suppose, of interest, if it is of interest to anyone, that regardless of the fact that they were missing some of the paperwork, they had notified the city that they had left a significant item off, and therefore were requesting a withdrawal of their bid, and because they were missing elements, that all kind of worked out, right?
If I may?
Yes, thank
Gary
you,
Reed.
Gary.
Okay, if Quality Contractors had not asked to withdraw their bid and it's staff's recommendation that that be allowed, then the council would have to make a finding that their bid is unresponsive and would have to make that finding and then award the contract to the lowest responsible bidder. So with quality contractors withdrawing their bid, with staff making that recommendation, the council does not need to find them unresponsive.
Okay.
And I'll add something to that. Sometimes when bids go out, and somebody, and obviously what quality contractors did was they just missed that piece of it. Say they wouldn't have had time to, the electrical end of it, to find out what it would have really cost and stuff, so the research would have been late, it would have been a guess. And sometimes
Yep.
that's what happens, and so they just miss those things, and so they did the correct thing. Counselors on Skype, whether it be Gina, Maureen, or Ann, do any of you have any questions for Scott on this?
I have no questions at this time.
Okay, Maureen?
I have no questions at this
Okay,
time.
Maureen. Gina, did you have something?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay, Ann?
Nope, same for me.
Okay.
Well, I move we accept the low bid from TML Construction, award the contract in the amount of $2,857,280, and authorize staff approval of construction change orders in the amount not to exceed 10% of the contract amount.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Art and a second by Brandy to accept the low bid from TMLC Construction, award the contract in the amount of $2,857,280, and authorize staff approval of construction change orders in the amount not to exceed 10% of the contract amount. And I will start the roll with Ann Zabala,
Aye.
Gina Teruscio,
Aye.
Maureen Laughlin,
Aye.
Sandra,
Aye.
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 and Brandy. Okay, so we've got unanimous ones on that. Again. So very good. Thank you very much, Scott, for that fine presentation.
Thank you.
We will move on to item number 3, which is Public Works Mutual Aid Agreement with Pullman, Washington. And Tyler Palmer is here to present. Tyler is with us on Skype as well. Tyler, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great, wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you. This is definitely the most unique and interesting city council meeting I've ever, I guess, digitally attended. Well, I'm really happy to be able to bring this forward. What you have before you, this mutual aid agreement we've got proposed, is a result of some work to assure continuity of our critical systems. With the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the first things as a city that we have to do is take a look at those basic critical needs that are provided by local government and figure out how we can assure that those can continue. And here in Moscow, it's a little bit of an interesting challenge because we have very advanced systems. We're big enough that we have advanced water production and treatment systems. We have a very advanced biological nutrient removal, water reclamation and reuse facility. And these systems require highly trained staff to operate. And with those systems, and given our geographic isolation, there aren't a lot of people in the area that actually know how to run those systems. And so as we looked at the prospect of having employees placed on quarantine and critical employees, we realized it was very important. And luckily, our neighbors to the west in Pullman have very similar systems to our systems. Their water system is very similar. Their treatment plant is actually very similar to our reclamation facility. And so it provides a great opportunity with our relationships with the folks over there to put a mutual aid agreement in place so that we can lend a hand if it becomes necessary to keep these critical systems functioning. And so what you have before you is a mutual aid agreement that was generated. Many thanks to Mia Bautista, our city attorney. She did great work getting this put together quickly for us. It was in early March that we proposed this to the city of Pullman. Kevin Gardis, their public works director, and Adam Lincoln both did great work helping us get this put together. And a big thanks to Mayor Johnson and the Pullman City Council for their willingness to take a look at this with us. The basic tenets of the agreement are that it really is pretty simple. We'll help them out and they'll help us out. We're on both sides. If aid is rendered, the expectation is that each entity would continue to pay their employees and cover their staff during that time, and that it would really just be a neighborly thing that we come across the border and help one another out, which is really in the spirit of how we've operated for a long time with our neighbors in the area. And so we bring this to the city council for approval for the mayor's signature so that we can enter into this and assure the continuity of these critical systems. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, questions?
Your Honor, if I may.
Gary Reedner.
We have several mutual aid agreements, mostly in law enforcement and fire response, already cooperating with our neighbors. So this is just a continuation of those relationships.
Okay. I'm going to go out to the folks at Skype there and ask if there's any comment. Gina Terusio, you have anything for us on this? Can't hear you, Gina. I'll move on to Maureen Laughlin.
Tyler, I just wanted to say thank you for your hard work on this, because it's really impressive that we have two neighboring towns in different states and we have that kind of relationship. And that what I also find is the particularity that there's not like this quid pro quo that says we use these many hours of yours and then you have so many hours of ours. It's just a mutual agreement based on, I think, really good relationships. And so thank you very much for having created those.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Those are good comments, Marina. One of the things I will tell you is we've worked very well for a number of years with the city of Pullman on various things. And of course, we have a joint airport that we work on, and that's a good, fine example of that very thing. And so that's exactly what we need to do. This is part of the plus. We need to work together. Gina, I keep seeing a blue line come up there. I don't know if you wanted to say something or not. Yes.
Bill, just a second. This is Maureen. Bill, is there a way we can hear everybody who's not there really well, but people who are sitting at council table, I'm not sure that you're speaking into the mic, so it's much more difficult to hear you. And I think that Gina was just sitting there staring like, I don't think she heard you saying, do you want to say something? So I encourage you to really consciously think about speaking into your mics.
Well, it's a mic over there on that table, Marina. I keep forgetting that. Sorry about this. This is our first time at doing this. Thank you for Maureen. Gina, do you have something you want to add to this?
Yeah, I completely do. I think this is great. This is exactly what we are seeing out in the world right now with our communities pulling together, willing to help. I just think, yay, Tyler. Awesome. Awesome job, sir.
Okay, with that, Ann, do you have any comments? Ann Zabala, please.
No, nothing to add. I think it looks great. And like everyone has said, I appreciate the cooperation.
Okay, thank you, Ann.
I have one question for
Randy.
Tyler. So I see it's discretionary and it's, up to the Public Works Director. Do you envision this only being used in these rare kind of emergency situations, or could it even be if someone is just short-staffed for a period of time that they're asking for assistance from the other community until they get the proper person hired?
As I mentioned earlier, we've always had a very cooperative relationship with the city of Pullman. I recall a couple years ago, we had a water leak and there were some parts that we needed to repair the leak. And we didn't have them on hand, and the shop where we could get them was going to be a day or two, and Pullman had some on the shelf, and they brought them over, and then we bought the replacement parts and put them back. And so there's always been this cooperative relationship. Something that to this extent, we are a little more limited in that the operator certifications are state specific. And so, and then on top of that, actually having staff going and working in another facility, we have to be careful with that because our ratepayers pay for the services for the city of Moscow's system. And so to this extent, it would be something that would be a unique situation like this, but we always work together and cooperate when we have things going on.
Okay, thanks.
All right, you were Sandra, have anything?
Not me.
All right. Well, I'm ready to make a motion to approve the Public Works Mutual Aid Compact with the City of Pullman.
Second.
Maureen, gotcha. Good job, Maureen. I got a motion by Brandy and a second by Maureen to approve the Public Works Mutual Aid Compact with the City of Pullman. I will start the roll with Ann Zavala,
Aye.
Gina Teruscio,
Aye.
Maureen.
Aye.
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 Well,
Aye.
let's go, we got Sandra, Art, and Brandy on that. Not in that particular order, by the way, Lori, so I hope you got it, but there's all 6 counselors voted for that. Okay, well, thank you. We're going to move on to item number 4 now. Fair and Affordable Housing Resolution Update. We got Bill Belknap here to do a presentation by Skype. Bill, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor, and good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. As signified by the proclamation passed just earlier this evening by the City Council, the city has had a long history of promoting fair housing practices within the community. In 1998, the city formed the Fair and Housing Commission, which was later amended to be the Fair and Affordable Housing Commission. But the primary charge of that commission when it was formed at that time was to further fair housing practices within the city of Moscow and to advise the council on fair housing matters such as the analysis of impediments to fair housing. The City of Moscow has gone above and beyond the basic federal requirements by amending city code to provide additional protections from discrimination in housing based upon sexual orientation and or gender identity and expression. The federal government encourages cities and counties to affirmatively promote fair housing practices, and one of the ways that they do so is to require communities to pass a resolution that affirmatively documents the city's commitment to fair housing. This is an obligation of any entity that receives community development block grant funds. And the city last updated this resolution in 2018. An updated resolution is in your packet for consideration this evening. With that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions for Bill?
I don't have any questions for Bill.
Okay, Brandy has none. Neither does Art and Sandra. Gene, I see your blue light flashing a little bit. Have you got something you want to comment on?
No, I really don't. I was just making sure I had everything on like I was supposed to.
You did. I see that blue line every once in a while. How about Maureen or Ann?
I think it looks great. Thank you.
This is Ann. Same.
Okay, good.
Well, I move to approve the updated fair housing resolution to replace Resolution 2018-02.
Second.
Second.
Gina, Sandra beat you. She'll have to be a little bit faster to the punch next time.
That's okay.
We've got a motion by Art and a second by Sandra to approve the updated housing resolution to replace Resolution 2018-02. I will start the roll with Maureen Laughlin.
Aye.
Gina Teruscio.
Aye.
Ann Zabala.
Aye.
Sandra.
Aye.
Arthur. And Brandy.
Aye.
Okay. We got them all in order that time, so there we go. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to our next item, item number 5, which is utility fee relief. This is a report Gary Reedner is going to be presenting, and I was supposed to say something. They can see you, but they can't hear you, I guess, on Skype. Is that correct?
In order that the microphone would pick up my voice, then we aren't broadcasting from the podium because it goes through our broadcast equipment and the picture is delayed, so it's kind of out of sync with the voice. So you'll have to make do with just my talking tonight.
Okay, so with that, Maureen and Ann and Gina will not be able to see you, but they will be able to hear the presentation.
Exactly.
Okay. Continue, sir.
Okay. As the council knows, beginning on Friday, March 13th, the mayor issued a proclamation declaring a disaster emergency based upon the COVID-19 threat. Since that time, we've had several emergency meetings. There have been 2 separate emergency medical orders which were issued by the mayor, and those were also the subject of resolutions that the city council considered, and those orders are in effect until the 5th of May 2020. During that same time, Wednesday, a little over a week ago, the governor issued his order, stay-home order, which has been in effect, and it's had a negative impact on both businesses and on residents. So, City Council asked staff to begin looking into ways that the council or the city could assist ratepayers, property owners, residents, businesses who have been adversely affected by the COVID-19 outbreak. First off, one of the things that we considered was how to assist those businesses that, or at least come up with a program to assist businesses who had been specifically named in those emergency orders. Those would be bars and restaurants, hair salons, barber shops, gyms, churches, and I'm sure I'm missing massage, therapeutic massage establishments, and so on and so forth. So we did some calculations to find out exactly what that would, how that would look. I sent a memo to City Council about a week ago with a proposed program, which was essentially a huge program, and it had some financial implications that would have forced the city to delay its capital program, and also it would have some negative impacts to the city's operations. However, in responding to the council's desire to get something done, we threw that out there for council to consider. After receiving feedback, we looked at some other different programs that we might be able to propose, those specifically targeted at those businesses that had been forced to either shut down or curtail operations. So we, based on feedback I received last week, I sent out some further ideas to the City Council and indicated we would propose or at least talk about those tonight. There are some issues that we needed to take a look at. One of those is property taxes. It's been discussed that does the council have control to reduce property taxes in the short term in order to lessen the impacts of the COVID-19, I guess, impacts. And the answer is that no, there really isn't at this point. Taxes that were levied as a result of the council's FY 2020 budget were they were certified to the Latah County Commissioners in September of 2019. They were levied beginning on January 1st of 2020. Most of those taxes, or a large percentage of them, have already been paid. Most people, or a lot of people, pay their taxes through their mortgages in a reserve account. So really there can be no tax relief. They will be collected. Now, the City Council is free as they go forward to adjust levies in future years should they so desire, but there's no immediate way for the council to provide any relief from a property tax perspective. Which leaves the only other avenue that really can provide any financial relief, and that is in the area of utility rates. So every billing cycle, and there are 12 of them in they're a monthly bill that you get for your utilities. The council could make some, I guess, accommodations for businesses and residential properties that have been adversely impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. It depends how the council wants to do that. One of the suggestions that came forward was to set up an account which could accept donations so that those with the means could pay extra to help offset some of the folks who couldn't afford to pay their utilities. That's certainly a noble gesture, and we can always take donations. The issue is not the city's ability to take donations. We can set up an account for that, and frankly, already have an account called Refunds and Reimbursements, donations that we could put those funds into. The question becomes, how do you distribute those funds in a fair manner? As I indicated to City Council, the city is carrying right now about $208,000 of debt, utility debt,
past due utility accounts that range anywhere from 30 days all the way back until they're sent to collection or they're written off. So that's a significant amount of money, and that was the arrearage before the COVID-19 issue became an issue. So should those donations come in, should those donations be used to pay that arrearage, or should it only be from a date forward? If you have multiple folks who can't pay their utility bills, do you take that donated amount and spread it over all of them? Do you pick certain of the utility counts that are in arrears and use the money to pay those? If so, what process do you utilize in order to make that determination? Which goes hand in hand with the next discussion that was suggested, and that is that we implement a needs-based utility, cessation or reduction. And a needs-based, as I indicated, that after consultation with the city attorney, fees in Idaho are charged according to the value of the services rendered. So the way that fees are assessed under our utility rates is blind as to the financial condition of the ratepayer paying them. We have classifications, restaurants, for instance, offices, mixed use, residential. Those are all assessed according to the classification of the ratepayer or the use, not because of the financial ability to pay. So once you start to cut out some class or some individual, you have to be very careful that you are doing it in a fair manner. And it takes time to develop that sort of a program. And if the council wanted to do that on a needs-based basis, for instance, if somebody filled out a financial aid request or a request for waiver, you would need pretty strict policies and protocols on when you apply that and when you don't. That will take some time to develop that. We'd have to get additional legal research done to make sure we can do that. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying that it will take some time to develop that. This is complicated by the fact that we are right at the very end of a billing cycle, and bills are going out even as we speak. So to implement something to provide immediate relief, we just don't have the ability to do that at this point. As I indicated to council, that we will continue to develop this and provide some alternatives. Since we have a month until the next time bills go out, we have some time to do that. I wanted to present tonight to assure the community that staff is responding to council's request, and we are developing some programs, and it'll take some time to do that, but we're busy doing that among all the other COVID-19 things that we're doing right now. So I'd certainly stand for any questions.
Gary, I have something. You had mentioned that we've got a line item, a line account for refunds and distributions account already in accounting. Do we have do we know what that amount is right now, currently?
No, and those refunds and reimbursements, I misspoke. We have donations as well, so we can take donations. Donations typically are for a certain purpose. We occasionally will get some donations that are unspecified. Somebody will give some money to the city. But typically, we'll take donations for things like youth scholarships at the Aquatic Center. When Blackbird Station was being funded, there were some folks who gave money for that. So that's typically when you have something like a program that you're trying to raise funding for. In this case, if we can identify a way to do it that council would sign off on, then we would have those donations come in and people would earmark those. This is for utility bills for those who can't afford to pay. And then they would get plugged into that protocol, whatever it is.
Okay. Questions for Gary?
Gary, this is Maureen. In your past experience, how well has the city been able to collect donations for any kind of needs like this?
There hasn't been very many times where the city has actively solicited donations for assistance, for utility bills or anything else. Typically, we ask for, or we will accept donations for things, as I mentioned, like Blackbird Station. The largest fundraising effort that we ever entered into was to purchase the 1912 building and to do the first phase of renovations. That was about a $2.4 million project, as I recall.
And how long did it take to collect that much money?
Actually, in that case, it was fairly quick because 2.2 million of it came from one source. But it is a long process. And that is not to say that there aren't people in the community who genuinely care and want to give money. Right now, they just have no vehicle. My biggest fear as an administrator is that unless we have a program set up that somebody who gives money can be assured it's going to be used for what they want it to be used for, then that goodwill can quickly be eroded and people
Right, and
become
so do you
dissatisfied.
have an example of how a means test would work?
That is what we're trying to look into. We've looked at, and thanks to Councilmember Sullivan, who, sorry, I almost lost your name there. Brandy
right over
Sullivan, who went out and did some independent research, and we looked at some programs around the country. They were mostly deferral programs that allowed somebody to defer payment of their utility bill to a later time. That can be effective. We have some issues in Moscow that are a little bit unique. We have an exodus of a lot of ratepayers at the end of the school year. And when they leave, typically it is mid-May, the bill doesn't come due and get billed until the beginning of June, and then collection doesn't start on it until then. So we have a lot, or a higher percentage than most cities, of those accounts, past due accounts. It's called move in and move out. If we were to defer utility bills when that move out were to occur, when it will occur, in fact, some of the students have already left, as a matter of
Right.
fact,
A lot of them.
then it just defers more money into that perhaps uncollectible account. So from a business standpoint, that doesn't seem to make sense either. So deferral versus outright forgiveness versus setting up an account and a protocol for assisting people in paying those bills. Those are essentially the three different programs. Now,
One of the things, and I wanted to intersect this, we've been working on this for several weeks now. And Gary, because this is a task that is very important to council as well as myself. And one of the things that we need our viewers to know is that we are very much working on this. We're very much interested on it. And there's some difficulties with that being said, things that we can overcome. And so we just have to work through the process. And it's something that's not a real fast thing. And so we, like all the other programs in place, everybody needs to have some patience with this. And boy, I know that's very, very hard sometimes, especially when you're a laid off person or your business is closed because of this city mandate or the state mandate that we have. And we don't know how long those things are going to last at all, but this is part of the process. I just wanted to put that in there, Gary.
thank you. And if I may, one of the things that we're looking at, and it just came out within the federal aid package, the $2.2 trillion aid package. We've been looking into that. It is fairly slow going, but there may be some intersection of utility billings, because one of the programs is to get a business loan to pay rent, utilities, and perhaps some salaries, and that loan might be able to be forgiven under the right circumstances. So if the utility bill has been forgiven, then of course you can't get federal money to pay it. So We would prefer, because our fees are used to pay for operations and capital projects, if the federal government is going to provide a vehicle perhaps to pay some of those fees, we would like to take advantage of that rather than cut our local revenues, so then we have to delay the capital projects or curtail the operations.
Okay.
Gary, this is Maureen again. It seems to me we've gotten several letters asking questions about rent freezing or moratorium on evictions. And it seems to me that what the cry is from the population is to do something about rent abatement or rent, failure to refusal or moratorium on evictions. And I guess it would be helpful to address that whether or not the city has jurisdiction to do something over that. Because it seems to be a loud cry, and then say we can't do that, but we can do this.
Yeah, and although I'm licensed to practice law, I've never practiced eviction law, tenant rights. It's my understanding that there's some state relief at this point, that the governor's office and the courts is offering some relief at the moment on that. Rent relief, or there is a request that we're currently going through in legal and administration, asking whether the city can exercise some sort of rent regulations. And the answer is the city does not have that jurisdiction. We do not have the ability to tell a landlord what they can and can't pay. That's typically a state or a federal function. So fully understand that rent abatement would be great. We have one building that we actually rent out, the city, and that is the Huggins House on F Street, which was a remnant of the property upon which the HERC and the Hamilton Low Aquatic Center is on. So the city could do anything they wanted with that rent, of course. However, the city has no other housing that we own or that we subsidize in any way. Usually that's done through a state entity or through tax credits, that sort of thing, and the city does not regulate that rent. So that is clearly beyond our jurisdiction.
Are you talking about HUD and those types of things too, Gary?
Yeah, and the Idaho Housing Authority, outfits like that. But we participate in those projects to try and provide some low and moderate income housing, but other than that, the city does not regulate that.
Some other questions for Gary? Sandra?
I have a question. When we're talking about trying to find ways to look at forgiveness, whether it's utility forgiveness or some other form, have you or the staff found any templates from other groups that you're sort of working on at this point? Or is it just all up in the air right now?
I'd say I've not found anything that is outright forgiveness. I've seen some programs that at least contemplate assistance to a class of ratepayers. For instance, should the council decide that they want to give some relief to those businesses that were directly regulated by the emergency orders, then in speaking with the city attorney, we believe that could be defensible. But that's different than cutting an individual out and saying, okay, even though you use the same amount of water and garbage service and sewer service as Art Betke did, we're going to charge him, but we're not going to charge you based on something that has nothing to do with the ratepayer's use of the resource, which is what makes it a fee. So it is a fine legal line that we're walking, and we want to make sure that when we make a recommendation to City Council, it's one that will withstand scrutiny.
And if I can do a follow-up on that? Sure. So the other thing that's been going through my mind, when we do come up with a way to provide some sort of relief, if that does come in terms of you're not going to have to pay this until October 7th. I know that's a random date, but
Sure.
say that's it. I think it's important that we also stipulate in there that a way for them to pay it back. Like if they haven't paid in 6 months, and all of a sudden you're going to owe 6 months on October 7th, I think we have to also think about a way to finance that. I guess that's the right term.
Yeah, and that's something that we're looking at as well. Council also directed that we look at a program whereby there will be no utility shutoffs during this period of time, and that right now extends through the emergency order of May 5th. Also during that time, there will be no late fees assessed. So essentially, it is, we're not going to penalize you if you cannot pay, but we have to have some way, some formalized program, or we have to have some method, as you say, that people can realistically pay the back bill. Oh, and if I may, I'm sorry, I promised Tim Davis that I would, he's our sanitation manager, that sanitation specifically, if you are a business, then you can contact him at the city's sanitation line. Certainly, you can also call the city's number at 208-883-7000 and be hooked up with Tim. You can designate, if you have a dumpster, say you're a restaurant that had a dumpster service that was being picked up twice a week, you can call up and actually go to an on-demand service. And many of those businesses have already done that. And it's especially relevant to a business that has gone through, had a large sit-down clientele. Now they're down to takeout. They have less people, less personnel, that sort of thing. They aren't generating as much waste from a sanitation standpoint. They can go to on-demand and limit their sanitation utility exposure there. So there, I promised I put the plug in, and now he can take the calls.
Brandy had something she wanted.
Just a couple comments in response, Maureen, to your question and yours, Sandra, which, I did kind of shuffle along a lot of information to Gary, which I appreciate you going through. I mean, I think there's a lot of great ideas out there, and they all sound like, oh, that would be easy. But then the more I've learned, the more I realize it's not as simple as it first seems, and it does require a lot of investigating and consultation with legal and so forth. Maureen, one of the examples I saw had criteria such as showing documentation that you've applied for unemployment as a result of COVID, or that you have been laid off, for example, or that one of the household members who contributes to the utility bills has been laid off. So, who knows if that is going to turn out to be something that we can do or not, but there are examples out there that I know that staff is working on exploring. And I agree with what Gary said also, that it does need to be very clearly defined. It can't be murky at all, or else you run that risk of one person getting it and one person not, without a clear understanding of why that was.
So I guess I really agree with that, Brandy, in many ways. My one concern I think about, we have small businesses in Moscow that are just like sole proprietors. And I guess I look at those and say, wow, I just was talking to somebody the other day about it and said, I don't qualify for unemployment because I kind of own the business.
Yeah, well,
And so I guess I'm sitting here thinking, well, somebody who's an employee deserves it, but somebody who actually is a small business person and has no employees and basically, is a massage therapist or does anything else, or an acupuncturist or whatever, I think we have to look at that whole sense and say, how do we do it? Which I really want to figure out some way to help and support these people. At the same time, I'm very concerned about creating friction about who got it and who didn't without really clear guidelines. And I know that's going to take a lot of time, Gary.
Right, and I think that's why I'm appreciative of the report and understand it. You couldn't whip this all together and come up with all the answers to do something about this billing cycle. I know you need more time, and because I am a business owner too, so I've been doing a lot of research myself about how to get assistance, and my understanding with the state is that they have now, for unemployment, they are now including people who are self-employed where typically they don't. So there are some, I would just say, I don't know all the answers, but you can look at the Idaho Department of Labor to see some restrictions that typically are in place have been waived and changed to allow those people who are independent, don't have payroll to also qualify for some of these assistance programs. But I think also what I was talking about was geared more towards residential relief. And I think, Maureen, you're talking a little bit more about the business impact. And I think they really do have to be treated separately from some of what you've said, Gary, or?
Yeah, that's certainly something that can be used as a classification. When I talk about classification, I'm talking about the businesses that were ordered to curtail activities or shut down. That's a class. They may go across different billing classifications, but they are reacting to an order of a legal order of the jurisdiction. So that could be distinguished as a class. That's the delineation point that you offer some relief or you don't. Commercial versus residential. Again, the easiest thing is to provide everybody some amount of relief. But again, you run into those situations. Not everyone, and I certainly don't mean this in the wrong way, but not every household has suffered a financial setback because of COVID-19 at this point. Both maybe one, if it's a single income household, that person may still be working, double income, both people may be working. Then there are some households where one or two of the breadwinners have been laid off because of it, or their income earning potential's been negatively impacted. So if you do it across the board, then people who have the ability to pay and should pay for the fees, the rates, the utilities that they've utilized, they don't need the help. You're kind of throwing them in with the ones who do need the help and thereby diluting the amount of assistance that you're trying to give.
I want to throw something out here, Gary, that's, I think, important for all of us. If you would go back 1 month ago, on March the 5th, or 6th, we wouldn't be talking about any of these things. We wouldn't even be thinking about any of these things. And so in this very short period of less than a month, we've had all these things thrown out at us, and I'm not just talking about the city of Moscow, I'm talking about the entire United States, state after state, community after community, and county after county. And I think there's a lot of things out there that are new that we've never done before as a country and as a state and as a city. And everybody's trying to muddle through and work through this the best that they possibly can. And it's a tough situation for everybody. It's just, it is a bizarre time in our history and our lives. And one thing I will say is, we'll work through this. We don't know what's going to come out the other end of it because we're right in the middle of this thing. So I kind of like being right in the middle of the hunt right now. We really don't know. Nobody really knows, really, until we work through this as we go along. So the point is we're working on things, we're looking at things, and I know, Gary, you're going to bring something back in 2 weeks on the 20th. We're going to be having part of this meeting as well, and it's one of those things that all of us are just going to have to work through, and geez, we don't have the answers for it, but we're working on things. And so, and to your point, Brandy, and thank you for all the work you have done, and I looked at a bunch of it, not into the depth that you have, but there's all kinds of programs out there. And there's things out there, and folks have to be able to search those things through and work through those things as well. And it's not easy because the unemployment claims were up 1,200% last week, and the phone lines are flooded with calls, as they are with the Small Business Association loans and these things, because there's literally millions of people doing this. There were, 10 million people laid off last week in this country, and that stresses all kinds of things that we did not have before. And so it's going to take some time to work through this big ball of stuff that we have. I guess that's about the best way I can explain it. But we're all working hard on it. I know this guy right here, his day starts off early in the morning, and it's usually with a conversation with me after he's been here for an hour, and that's already like at 7 in the morning, and he's working on these things until he goes home. He's been here all day today working on stuff. And we never forget this. We don't take it easy on it. We hammer away on it, and we get multiple emails, which is great. We want folks out there getting a hold of us. We don't have all the answers, ladies and gentlemen. That's just how it is. We know that. We're very compassionate about working through it the best we can. And if there's ever a time our city needs to be able to work together on things, now is the time, and that's what we're doing. Every single one of us. Doesn't matter who we are. So I just wanted to put that out there, Gary.
Thank you. So, in essence, we will continue to review and bring those alternatives back to city council, and we'll bring them back as quick as we can.
And so just to be sure I'm understanding, are you anticipating coming back with some proposals for residential relief and a different proposal for these businesses that were directly impacted? Is that what you're
We're not really
pursuing, or-
sure right
Okay,
now.
Okay.
And just so that, to put these in perspective, we are doing a lot of COVID-19 Band-Aids across the city. Also, this is our prime time to develop our budget. And usually all the department heads are working hard putting their budgets together. Well, they are busy doing other things now, so finance department is extremely busy at this time. So trying to find some time to do this. And it sounds like I'm making excuses. I don't mean to. People are putting in long hours and some fairly intense stuff. So we'll get back as quickly as we can. Again, we want to find something that is defensible, and if it isn't, then it doesn't do anybody any good.
That kind of ties right into our COVID 2019 report, so we might as well go right
Yes.
into that too, Gary. I mean, because these are kind of crossed over what we've already talked about some of
Okay.
this stuff, so let's move right into that.
Okay, well, I've already talked about the history of, and this council I know is now very bored with how we got here. So we are now in Tier 3 of our pandemic response. It wasn't too many weeks ago that we were in front of the council saying, hey, here's our updated pandemic response plan. We're at Tier 1, maybe, toying with maybe going to Tier 2, but we went from Tier 2 to Tier 3 essentially overnight. And that, with the state of Washington, Whitman County, Nez Perce County, Kootenai County, all having active confirmed COVID cases, we stepped it up so that we were able to provide the response that we needed to as an organization. I was just been informed that Latah County today has identified their second confirmed coronavirus case. So hopefully we will have a very controlled response to that and be able to provide services. But we are in Tier 3, which means that city buildings are closed to the public now. We have access, the telephone number that I gave folks a while ago, to 208-883-7000. We're having that answered remotely. We're having as many people as possible work from home. Naturally, that has some challenges. Our information systems department has worked tirelessly to provide equipment that, it was interesting, I was talking to a contemporary of mine from Southern Ida who said, you never would have thought of this 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you ever took a piece of city equipment home, you got fired. Now we're telling people, please take this computer home and work in the safety of your home. Take calls on your cell phones, do that sort of thing, because we don't want to provide opportunities for this virus to spread. But that being said, as you all know, the meetings are the banes of our lives. It seems like we have meeting after meeting after meeting, but the bottom line is we get a lot of stuff done. When you get a bunch of people in a room and your efforts are all focused in one place, you can usually get a pretty good direction. Everybody knows where you're going, that sort of thing. Doing that by this sort of meeting just doesn't have that same flavor. So we aren't as efficient as we would be if we were able to get everybody in one room. That in and of itself has its own challenges. We're finding out working remotely has some challenges. How do we coordinate people? How do we put those efforts in? Are we really getting as much efficiency as we can? And I think everybody who has people working remotely is running into those same questions. Now, that doesn't mean you won't still see our officers, our emergency medical personnel, our street crews, water, sewer crews, so on and so forth, out there working. Our information systems guys are in here all the time. So we have people that can't work from home, and they have to be on the job. So we try to provide them as much opportunity as they can to socially distance themselves. You know, don't work in close proximity to somebody else. For safety purposes, we try to have X amount of people per floor of a building, but yet you don't want to have people very close to each other. So we're finding a way to work around that. There are a lot of issues that came up when we went to Tier 3. One of the first things that was done is remove opportunities for folks to congregate and violate the social distancing rule. One of the first things that was done back on the 13th was that the play fields that the city participates in with the school district, as well as the play fields that the city owns itself, that they were going to be closed to organized sports. So indoor recreational activities, recreation programs were also stopped at that time, because you get a bunch of kids in a place playing basketball, they're not going to maintain social distancing. So the safest thing to do, as terrible as it sounds, is to not provide that opportunity. Well, there were some things that went along with that we've since found out maybe we didn't need to do. One of those recreational programs was the community gardens. So it got thrown in with the rest of the recreational programs. Just today, in discussions with our Parks and Rec folks and the city attorney, we're opening those back up. Gardening is a good, healthy activity, and people need to utilize protocols. If the two plots are within 3 feet of each other, somebody's working their plot, you're going to have to wait until they leave before you work yours. So it's not an excuse not to do it. Just as our pathways and our general recreational parks are open, if you want to go walk around East City Park, you can go walk around East City Park. You can walk the Paradise Path. Maintain your social distancing. So we hope people will do that, and we're trying to look at some different things. The recycling center is closed, and right now you cannot take your
Yard waste?
well, your garbage you can't take out to the transfer station because of the close proximity that their staff gets to the people bringing it in on the weigh scale. Handing money, credit cards back and forth creates opportunities for exposure. So they have not accepted any people can't go out there to dump their garbage. Likewise, as the mayor just indicated, the yard waste drop-off behind the recycling center has likewise been shut down. Terrible time of year to do that. I mean, people are cleaning their yards, they're trimming their bushes, they're home, so under isolation, so naturally they want to do that, and the governor is telling them, as all the health organizations are saying, get out and get some exercise, get some fresh air. So Tim Davis, our sanitation manager, is currently working with Latah Sanitation to see if there's some way that we can implement social distancing criteria or protocols so that that can be opened up. And we hope to have some answer for the public by the end of this week. I hope we can. Otherwise, we're asking people to pile your compostables or your yard waste, and then when it opens back up, you can take it out there. Don't know what that program's going to look like. Don't even know if it will work, but we're continuing to look into that. I think Maureen had mentioned we've had questions about is there rent abatement that can be exercised, so on and so forth. There are a lot of questions about things like that.
Gary, there's some answers on that stuff. I just sent it to Mia.
Okay, thank you. So we're continuing to look at these. I've been working with the city attorney a lot, trying to answer people's questions as best we can. There was an email that was sent around today asking, or actually late last week and then today, about whether or not the city would issue a moratorium on 5G small cell installations in Moscow. And under the pandemic response, is that something that could be done? And so we looked at it from a legal standpoint. Mia looked at the FCC regulations again, and there's really no reason for doing that. It is, telecommunications is an essential service identified under the mayor's stay-home order and under federal regulations as well. So we're trying to pick these questions as they come and deal with them as best we can. So what is the city's pandemic response? Again, we are in Tier 3. As part of Tier 3, one of the things that we've contemplated is putting together a incident
Command
incident command system.
Incident action report.
Yes.
Plan.
I get stuck in the acronyms. The fire department has the IAP, which is an incident action plan. They have all kinds of different acronyms. Suffice it to say that we've had a long history, our fire department and police department especially, have had a long history with the incident command system, which is a national system for if you have a disaster emergency, how do you deal with it? And it's very similar to the structure that we have at the city now. We have the mayor and council who act in a policy-making advisory capacity with the mayor in charge of operations. You've hired a city supervisor to act as the operations officer for the city. The incident action plan, which the chiefs will talk about in a few moments, actually designates the city supervisor as the incident commander. Then we have an operations branch, a logistics branch, planning branch, so on and so forth. So they'll get into more of that. But what it does is it allows folks to see where you fit into the plan. If something happens, how does it all cascade down so you're able to give assistance where it's necessary? For instance, if we did have a situation, I'll give you a small example. If we have a volunteer EMT who provides services to someone who turns out to have COVID-19, you don't want to send that EMT back home to be with his or her family or friends, because then all of a sudden you get the community spread if there has been an infection. So plans are made to house that person somewhere, in a hotel room or in a dorm room or something, which brings a plethora of other things with it. How do you feed that person when they're in isolation? So on and so forth. So all of these things end up going into this incident command structure. If we were to have a situation where people were displaced, and floods are the things that typically we've used this for in the past. We've never had a flood in Moscow where we've had people who, whole neighborhoods who were flooded out of their homes and they needed to be housed somewhere. But if they did, the incident command structure would have a plan for doing so. We would have an inventory of where do we have capacity. Is it hotels? Is it unused dorm rooms at the University of Idaho? Do you set cots up at the HERC? So on and so forth. So it's a matter of when these are deployed, they're deployed in a way that is systematic and moving forward by degrees. So again, the chiefs will talk about that a little bit, but that is one thing we've been working on. We came into this thing with a pandemic plan that we developed in 2007, did some good work updating that. Jen Piffner led that charge when we were back east at Washington, D.C., updated that, and we were ready to go with it. Now we have an incident command structure that the chiefs will report on tonight. So we feel that we're in pretty good shape from a community response or city response to a community crisis situation. That being said, I know there are a ton of questions by the council. We are continuing to answer questions as they come in. We're trying to provide as much service as we can under these circumstances, but it's challenging. So I'd stand for any questions that you have.
Sandra?
So, and I don't need you to go in depth on this, but with your volunteer fireman example, let's say that that did happen, and a person has to go to a dorm room or whatever to sit this out. Is there a plan in place if they have pets in the house and they're single?
Yeah.
Okay, I just
It
wanna
would
make sure
depend
that-
on what the individual circumstances
I just want
are.
to make sure that that's also there, that the furry friends don't starve to death while.
You bet.
Okay.
You bet. And there are situations where, you know, if you have someone, some of the protocols that we put in place, it's cold and flu season anyway if the COVID-19 wasn't out there. So if somebody has the sniffles, for instance, or they have any flu-like symptoms, they are told to go home. If they call in, they're told to stay home. If they've developed those symptoms, we look at the people that person worked with, quarantine them or get them checked. So we're trying to prevent this spread as much as we can. But you're less efficient. We had some folks who were actually out internationally and flew back after the mayor's proclamation. So they were coming back when we were already in disaster emergency status. Coming from a foreign country, they were put in quarantine. And they're just now getting ready to come out. But you can't take those unreasonable risks.
Right.
Less efficiency, but hopefully more safety.
Art, did you have something?
Yeah, I had less of a question, more of a comment about the city's preparation for this. And some of it might have just been inadvertent, but we've done a good job of prepping the city in other ways. Been out doing a lot of walking and walking and walking some more just to get out. But the pathways and identified routes through town are being heavily used. And I think this is a good reflection on previous city councils, Transportation Commission, Pathways Commission, Parks and Rec, who've created this system for people to be getting out of their house and not going completely stir crazy. And so I just wanted to make a mention of that, and kudos to the city for having that in place already as a needed outlet for people who'd otherwise be slowly turning into the Donner Party in their own house or something. So kudos to all of those folks.
Gina or Ann, do you have, I know we heard from Maureen a couple of times, do either one of you have any comments? Maybe they heard me. Gina or Ann, did you guys have comments by chance?
Yeah, this is Anne. So I think I'm just processing the information that's been shared, and I appreciate all the work that y'all are doing and everything that's been discussed. So I keep coming back to utilities because I think that in all the communication we're hearing from people, they're looking for some kind of help, right? Like people are feeling it now. And I think in talking about sort of what falls under the municipal umbrella in Moscow, and it comes back to utilities. So I had a couple questions. So Gary, you said that late fees are being waived already. That's a decision that's been made.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Are we communicating that to people in any way outside of the discussions that we're having in these meetings?
I don't believe that we have. And of course, wanted to come in and propose or at least discuss issues tonight, but yeah, that can be communicated.
Are we planning on including anything to that effect in the letter that's supposed to go out for this next billing cycle?
That letter is, I think, I talked to Jen about that tonight. We were talking about some changes. That's certainly something we can put in there if it is not.
I think that would be helpful to folks to at least know, too. And then the other piece, when we've talked about no shutoffs through May, has that been communicated outside of the discussions that we've had in our meetings? I haven't seen anything, any press releases. Is it
I
going
thought
out?
I talked to a reporter about it, but no, I don't believe we've had a press release out on it.
And that goes into something else when you talked about utilities, because I know Vista came out publicly and announced this here like maybe a week and a half ago that there would be no shutoffs of power through this whole duration, the way I understand it. So just FYI, I didn't know if you knew that or not, Ann, but that's something I seen from Paul Kimmel, their local regional guy from Vista.
I think even some communication about some of the things that we are planning on doing would be helpful to people who are asking for some kind of assistance and looking, I think, to understand the parameters of what cities can and can't do. I think that's one piece that could be helpful. And then we talked about, so people can donate if they'd like to. We have that mechanism already. Where can people do that? Like if they wanted to right now, if we take donations for stuff like scholarships, the things that we've talked about, if somebody wanted to donate, where could they do that?
They just mail it to the city, same address you mail your utility bill to, 206 East 3rd, P.O. Box 9203, enclose a check and what you would like to be used for. Again, I'm cautious, if not reluctant, to advertise a donation program for utility relief if we don't have a process for doing so. I mean, people can do that, and we can give them our best assurances that we will develop a program for council's review, but the program that is developed may not be what the person who donated intended when they gave the donation. So, again, that's just, but we'll certainly take the donation. It won't be spent on anything but utility relief. We've even had situations where if we had a project that did not proceed, that we would return donations to the donors. That was fairly limited. It was less than 25 donors, but, and in this case, I would hope, and my suspicion is the response from our citizens would be much more than 25 donors.
Thank you for the info. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Thanks. And how about you, Gina?
I appreciate, first of all of the work that Finance and Gary have been doing, trying to figure out how we can provide some relief. I know that even in my brief digging into it, it got quickly very, very far over my head. And I do appreciate that work, Gary and Sarah and your group. I think the really good moments here in this is that little by little, the help is coming out from the federal government, from the state government. We're starting to see big organizations moving very slowly, but the pieces are coming. And for me, on the ground where I live, the really great parts are the things like the community garden reopening, or the fact that I do see a lot of people out walking with their kids and their dogs and the baby and their baby stroller. I think that little steps towards normalcy will go a long way to help us. So those little things that, we reacted and we are taking care of everybody, but those little things that we can say, oh, no, that's an easy thing to reopen again, or this is the recycle center, let's consider bringing that back online. Those are great things. And I just applaud anything that we can do to start looking for those little victories.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
I have one more question.
Okay, Sandra.
So, and this is probably for Chief Fry more than anyone, but when we're talking about a response, we are talking about people using the pathways and using the parks and walking around. People are getting pretty close together. Are you having officers stop and kind of remind people they got to stay away? I'm wondering what your plan is with that. Because it's going to get warmer this week.
As with anything, we're educating people. When we have conversations with people, we're just, reminding them that to keep a distance. We're even reminding our officers as they're out on calls to keep a little bit more of a distance, even with the calls that we're taking and stuff. So we're using it as an educational approach and continuing the community policing philosophy that we've always encompassed.
Do you have officers out on bikes on the pathways at this point?
Not yet.
Okay.
That'll probably come pretty soon. Now that the weather's starting to get nice, we'll have more officers out and about. We're trying to, we got some officers that are actually our backup officers, so we've got teams ready to go in case officers start getting sick or anything like that. So we're running full shifts still, down a few because of just regular, seasonal colds and stuff, but we're doing okay.
Cool. Thank you.
A follow-up on that, Sandra, is that in my roamings, I've seen that the people who clump up tend to be family units who are already within the same household, and people who are not within the family unit tend to spread out very nicely. So to that extent, I've noticed no problems.
I've seen it with kids a lot of kids bunched up together. But I just wonder what was going on there. I appreciate that.
Okay, well, I think with that, Gary, I think you gave us a great report. Both those reports were good reports. I think we'll go right into the incident action report with the two chiefs so they can tell us what they're doing with this. Come on up, Brian, Chief Brian Nickerson. And of course, you just seen Chief Fry with us, James Fry. So what do you have for us this evening, sir?
Well, Mayor, Council, and special guest on Skype. It's kind of one of my new things these days. Online stuff. I've had more meetings online in the last week to 10 days than I have in all of my years of using a computer. So what we want to talk about for just a minute is the function and operation of an Emergency Operations Center and what an incident action plan is. You can have an incident action plan and not have an Emergency Operations Center open. If you've been around the fire service at all, we operate on an incident action plan every day. It's just in our head. It's not wrote down. So we always follow some form of philosophy and some form of structure to make sure that we're mitigating whatever situation that we're in. The quick plug I have is not only the police department, but the fire and EMS department that we have. Every day they're going all these calls and taking every precaution they can. So these frontline folks are putting it on the line every day. Volunteers and the PD. So, I can't go without recognizing these folks and the hazards that they're encountering every day with folks going to a sick call and you don't know what they're encountering, a breathing problem or whatever the case may be, and they don't hesitate to go. So we do have things in place so that way if they do get exposed, we already have some of those things, and the furry friends, as Sandra called it, those are all things being considered, not only the furry friends, but what about kids? You're a single mom, single dad. What about those things? I know people in our organization have already, inquired about if something happens, we'd be more than willing to take care of their pet, take care of their kid. And that's an internal thing within our group, our family, so to speak, because that's what we are. So with that being said, I think it got distributed to you from Gary. I believe you have at least a draft of it. We've been working on this for the last about week and a half or so. And basically, it's structured in a way of, like Gary alluded to earlier, is, the council and the mayor being the decision makers, the policy makers and so forth, and working with Gary collectively as an incident commander over this whole thing of having input into what decisions are being made. Well, what's Gary's job? What would Gary's job being the incident commander? His goal is to set the objectives and stuff that we want to achieve over the next whatever operational period there is. Then somebody's going to ask me, what's an operational period? Operational period can be anything from 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours to days or a week or weeks. It kind of comes from the wildland circle. What I anticipate, at least initially, in just conversations with Gary and the mayor, is probably a 3-4 day, 2-3 day, depending on how things are going, how things are progressing, about what this plan looks like. And what that is the operational period is, Gary sets the objectives of, these are the things we want to accomplish or complete within this 3 days, whatever that is. We want to make sure we have all these things established, or all these things completed, or at least worked on. And then you set the next operational period goals before the end of the previous one. So you're already writing a plan before the next one before that one expires. So going down the list, you'll see legal on there. I'll be honest, that's typically not in any incident action plan. But it's important for us here, only being because of the situation that we're in with the COVID-19 issues and some of the things we may come across about quarantining or isolating, what can or can't we do legally or as a community, what are we allowed or not allowed to do. We've already had a question or two about that Mia has answered about what is the difference between quarantining, can we do that, or isolation or so forth. So it's already played a role, so it's already important. The next thing here, I have to have my glasses, so I apologize. I can't see. The information officer is just that. It's basically, it's getting the information out to the public, what's going on, some information that, we want to share out there with people about different things, or, hey, if we did have to, for some reason, open a shelter for some reason for a whole community or whole area, where's that going to be? Typically, it'll be like in a flood, for example, or some other event, large event, disaster type event. This is kind of a slow moving, I say controlled, but it's not controlled. It's just slow in some regards. So, but information that we want to get out there and share about what we're doing, or maybe some of the precautions that need to be taken. Just under that, you'll see there's liaison over to the right. Over to the right. And that can be people from the university, from Latah County, from the school districts, or other people that are maybe not included within the plan directly, that maybe have a value within the plan. So we're still working on some of these things, just because, like I said, it's slow moving and still flexible. This plan is scalable. It's up, it's down. We can move it, change it, even from operational period to operational period. It doesn't happen a lot, but there are some things that we might find along the way that, hey, we didn't think about that. Let's add that in there under logistics or under operations or whatever. So you go down, you see the operations section, which that's me under Gary. And then what's my job and function? My job and function is to make sure that everything that we're doing day to day, responding to calls, responding to incidents, the shelters are in place through Tyson, and we'll get to that here in a second. If Chief Fry needs anything from the law enforcement perspective, if we need to reach out to other folks. So they'll communicate that up to me, and then it'll go over to the logistics if we need something, or planning to make sure things are written for the next operational period. So under me is the medical response. You'll see Debbie Karscallen, which is the division chief of EMS, which basically, if you go down vertically, you'll see hospitals, Dr. Garrett. EMS supervisor is Josh Peak. He's our first lieutenant of the ambulance. Working with Kathy Mabbitt, the coroner, and then you'll see skilled and assistant learning with Rachel Zimmerman, who is the director at Aspen Park. So what that does, basically, it gives information sharing on a smaller scale than to have to call 4 or 5 different people. So when she wants to find something out, for example, about, let's say, the healthcare facilities, Rachel has already talked to, for example, to Good Sam in Palouse Hills. So she already has that information. So Debbie does not have to take, 3 and 4 different phone calls. It's kind of consolidated information back up through the chain to get things accomplished. So that's kind of how this whole system works. It's communication tools up and down. And then what are their needs? Anybody in this system is out looking for the needs for the community or the response or whatever the case may be. So you'll hop over from Chief Karscallen. You'll see also public health to the left. So she could communicate with Carol Morale at public health and find out information. Maybe there's guidelines that we need to be following that maybe Dr. Garrett is unaware of, at least right now today. That's the one shout out I'll give to is Gritman Hospital. I'm telling you, they are ahead of the curve, and they have been ahead of the curve, along with our businesses in town and all of that. Our community has been outstanding, and Gritman, I know, has been forward thinking, and that is attributed to Dr. Garrett, Kara, and just everybody at Gritman, and that's why I believe that we're making the progress that we're making. I truly believe that. Not going to say it's going to go away, but we still have some challenging times, I think, coming in the next couple weeks probably, but I think that we're making some headway a bit, and it's attributed to everybody in the community, but also Gritman in general, just because of some of the actions and stuff that they've taken and precautions they've taken. Law enforcement, like I said, Chief Fry. Under him, he has, for example, Will Crassel. So basically, he'd be talking to Will and anything that his folks need. He'd be working with the sheriff, with Richie Skiles, and then also the Idaho State Patrol if something should be needed. Again, there's things that might pop up that we might need something down the road, but that's all part of the planning process of getting things accomplished ahead of time or for that next operational period we might need. The next thing over, you see community response. That's basically the community needs. Business support, there's two functions under business support, like Jenny Ford through the Chamber of Commerce. Again, getting information out, what can we do to help the businesses or the community? Megan Pratt, buy local, hey, let's support our community, let's support the restaurants and coffee shops and all those things that we have out here in town. Let's support them as much as we possibly can. And then also you'll see down the school support, which is like Dr. Greg Bailey. Well, why is it Dr. Greg Bailey? Well, because he has communications with all the other schools. I was on a conference call last week, or the week before, and Dr. Bailey was on it along with, I think, Logos and Palouse Charter and stuff. And basically, the other schools basically wanted to thank Dr. Bailey because they're providing the meals and stuff for their kids as well. So he already has contact with all these folks and already has that in, if you will, and that's a resource that we can use to our advantage because he can have those communications with them. So it's just a positive thing. City infrastructure, as Tyler alluded to a little bit earlier, maybe there's some things that we might happen because if all of the folks out there at the water reclamation facility maybe get sick, and what are we going to do? That's an important thing that we need to make sure is covered. Same thing with the fire and EMS stuff or the PD stuff. All of these things we need to make sure we have a plan for. So the next thing is University of Idaho, or ITD infrastructure, and then University of Idaho. Basically, what is the university's needs? How can we help them? They're a resource that we can reach out to. Next thing over, community care and shelters, basically Tyson Barrett, Captain Barrett. Community volunteers, that includes, for example, American Red Cross, any community volunteers that we might need. Let's say we do have people that are at Targhee Hall or Stevens Wing at the campus that are isolated or quarantined. Well, maybe we need some people to run some food somewhere or do something. So maybe there's other volunteers that are out there to do that. Next thing over is planning. Bill Belknap, and I know Bill, I talked to Bill yesterday, on Friday. And he's going to be working with Todd Perry from the University of Idaho as far as the planning group, because Todd is very familiar with writing plans and so forth. And Bill's going to get a crash course. He has some great ideas and already thinking outside the box, which that's what that planning group does, is think outside the box. What are you thinking about for that next operational period? Maybe it's a week from now, but it's writing the plan and developing that. And you'll see under there, like some of these things are not filled in, you'll see to be determined. Maybe it's not needed at this point in time, but the one thing down there is Lori Hopkins' document, and that's documentation of the plan, and that's other documentation that may be needed throughout this entire process. As the city clerk, she can actually have access to all that and keep that for us nice and neat, and basically work with Bill and anything else they may need to do this. Next thing over is logistics, and that's Tyler. Basically, if you're familiar with military at all, a little bit logistics, what can we get? Where can we get it? And how are we going to get it? So right under that, Latah County Disaster Services, Mike Nealon. Basically, we'll work with the county in any way we can on any of this plan. So he would fall under logistics. And then down under there, you'll see some things. Supplies is Dwight. He would be the go get. Where's it at? How are we going to get it? And then he would talk to somebody else about how we're going to pay for it, right? So it's kind of a process here. You'll see Jesse Flowers and the information systems. Like Gary said, IS has been doing a phenomenal job with trying to get people access from home and all that. So I think overall, we're making progress. Pam Rogers, who works for me as the EMS division or EMS coordinator. Basically she'd be in charge of getting the food from either Sodexo, Winco, Walmart, wherever for however many people we need. If we have, let's say 20 people put up somewhere, where are we going to get it from? We just got to figure out how we're going to get it, and then, and so forth. So basically establish that resource along the way. And then communications is Megan. Basically, we're not going to use radios. Not in this type of case. It's all going to be by phone. So they would basically update our phone list or phone tree. The last thing here, probably one of the biggest ones is finance, and that's Sarah, obviously. Would oversee the finance portion of the entire process. We have time unit, which is basically how we're tracking time, and as you might or might not know, we're tracking our time versus regular time versus COVID time for however many hours or whatever you're working on this event versus your regular hours. So basically it's to make sure we're tracking that appropriately and accounting for it. Because all this comes back to, all the documentation comes back to how are we going to get reimbursed or can we get reimbursed? It boils down to documentation. It's pretty simple. Procurement, Judy Lopez, it's what she does today. She does all of our blue sheets. Elisa Anderson, comps and claims, basically that's to help us process things for possibly getting reimbursement at some point in time, and then the cost unit. So that's kind of how the system works. It seems clunky, but it's amazing once you get as established and as you start going through the processes and working on things, and then it just takes off from there. Basically, it's a collaborative effort is really what it's all about. It's people making decisions that's going to best serve the community and so forth. And even going back to like Tyler mentioned about the mutual aid agreement, and we have mutual aid agreements like Gary said, we've already I've worked with all the quad counties already and so forth on needs and so forth like that. So we're already, in those discussions should something occur with all of our folks or their folks or whatever. So those are a lot of conversations that go on. So you got anything else?
I think this really goes to show some of the MOUs that we've placed in past years with law enforcement and fire, now with the streets and other facilities that come into play. I've already had conversations with Sheriff Skiles and from Captain Ed Westbrook with ISP, and they've already let us know what help is available to us if we need it for law enforcement. So some of that's already taken place because of this plan, but also because of we're so used to working together with big situations like this.
Well, it looks like a great incident action plan to me. So, Brian, look what you guys put it together. It's awesome. Questions for the chief? Art?
Yeah, this looks like the whole layout seems to be an all-hands-on-deck sort of approach to an incident. But Chief Nickerson, you said that it's a flexible kind of work in progress almost, but can one imagine that the whole thing isn't necessarily activated for any particular incident? And if maybe a portion of it is activated, can we assume that information is shared back and forth, at least across the top tier, in case the incident increases in magnitude and other people need to be ready?
Right. We had a department head meeting Thursday, I guess it was. Yeah, Thursday, with a lot of the key players up here as far as so they understood kind of where things set. This is only one very small piece. There's 16 more pages to this. This would be the easiest thing to go over. But each one of these have what's called a 204 form. Basically, these are the things these are the resources, these are the people, everything's plugged in for a reason. But yes, if we open up an emergency operations center, it does not mean that everybody has to be here, number one. We don't want that, obviously, too many people. We can do some of it remotely by meetings. In my experience over the years, I've been involved in a lot of these, and I believe that the top tier, when some very important decisions that need to be made, let's say at the mayor/council level, and Gary, for example, need to be somewhat in person. And the reason being is because that way, you kind of get a feel for everybody and have that conversation. It's a little bit harder on a Skype or Zoom or whatever. It's just a little more impersonal, but I'm not saying it can't be done. But information sharing, that's what all this is all about, and everybody's been included. I met with my staff this morning. They've known about it, but they actually seen the plan this morning, and stuff, so, this is still a work in progress a little bit. Bill and Todd are gonna be working on planning of what can we change already. If we wanted to stand this up, let's just say Thursday, we can implement this and go forward. So we're already prepared, we've been prepared. It's just a matter of how we continue to move forward. If we want to scale it down, we can scale it down, we can scale it up. It's just some needs are going to be immediate, some are not. Like I said, this is kind of a slow-moving thing. And it's all about, and again, some of these things we already know, resource-wise, that we might need, so. But yeah, that's communication is the biggest piece. It really is. Not only internally on this, but out to the community as well.
Brandy?
So, within the more detailed documents that are in process or in the planning stage, will there be, or are there specific, duties or training for some of these positions? Like I'm thinking, just at a glance, like Megan in communications or Pam in food. I mean, that's not something that they normally do. Is it defined what that entails?
There is actually job aids for each of these positions.
Okay.
That's the one thing about the wildland world. This is all things that have aids to it, if you will. Some of them are a little bit older, but yes, there are things that are specific to, it kind of, Gary has them. I have them. Chief Fry has them. For that section, those are just things that help you, remind you of things you need to be thinking about, or, man, we need to make sure we do that, or, hey, these are the forms I need to use. And one of the biggest pieces, and I can't stress this enough, is every one of these folks, once we specifically stand it up, and preferably sooner, everybody needs to fill out what's called a 214 form every day. And what that is big events are things that are going on during that time frame to document it for the reimbursement thing going forward. And the more we can document, the more we do, the better it is for Elisa or whoever moves that forward for the reimbursement piece. We use it we use an instant action plan at every University of Idaho football game. We write a plan for every football game. We do a 214 for every football game, or for every large event. We use it for, whatever, concerts, everything that we do an incident command center for, we do the same thing.
And of course, the reason for that is because all of a sudden something could go haywire real quick. That's why it
all.
happens.
So as long as everybody knows what their responsibilities are, and
Yeah,
sounds like that pretty clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I know,
Yeah.
I've been around this for a long time, but I know that a lot of people haven't. And take Bill, for example. I don't want to throw him to the wolves, and I made a promise to him on Thursday that I will not let him fail. I won't. But, I'm willing to help anybody in this entire plan, but also that's why you take other resources that we have available and plug them into places like the University of Idaho with Todd and so forth like that are familiar with doing this. So I've already got them connected. So they're going to be talking and stuff like that, so.
One other
Okay,
quick question. So, especially, this situation is making me really think of, we're constantly thinking about what if this person themselves is not able to work or is sick, is out. So, is it structured such that when you have to implement one of these, if one individual that's responsible in one of these boxes cannot work, that the supervisor determines who steps in that place?
Yes,
and can,
yeah. Yeah, it's basically the lead person, or if that person's out, then that'd be a conversation that Gary would have with whoever. I've worked with Gary for the last week and a half and Jen on this whole thing. And those are some conversations like, well, who would fit better here or there? And so it's one of those things, it's conversation. Hey, if this person gets sick or I get sick or whatever, who's next? So there are a couple of these that do have two people. Mm-hmm. For example, Dan, Division Chief Ellenwood's right under me, or with me. So that way, if I have to go or something like that, and that's the other reason why Josh Peak, for example, is down there and there. He could step up into Debbie's if Debbie gets sick, or vice versa. It's like I said, it's all in meeting the need, and that's the whole point of it. Wildland stuff, you have 3-4 people per position, and it's a whole nother world. And we wouldn't need to do that.
Okay.
We're good.
Everybody's good? Any questions from Gene and Maureen or Ann out
I'm gonna try
there?
to do this without disconnecting. So
Okay, well, hopefully you won't
I'm
disconnect
guessing I
it.
do this. I'll just do that, right?
Oh,
Okay.
there they are,
I
they're
didn't
still
mess it
there.
up, Zach. Thanks, Zach.
Brian didn't delete you up there, so we're all good. Well, thank you, Chief, it was a
Tense.
excellent report, so.
Okay. Need anything else, let me know.
Okay, well, that moves us to the end of our meeting, but before we adjourn, or ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, a couple of things I just want to say to the public out there. I said this early, this is a unique time for all of us, ladies and gentlemen, and we're working hard, and I know the folks out there in our city are working hard. We're going to make it through this, and yep, we got some more weeks ahead of us. We don't know how long this is going to go. Well, we're going to keep plugging through and doing it right, and hopefully with these different reports and the things that your viewing audience saw this evening, you'll know we're moving forward with things, and we've got a plan in place, and we'll execute that plan. But I just say for folks, have patience, stay calm, do the best you very well can, and this is tough on all of us, so just keep that in mind. And so with that, folks, I would seek a motion to adjourn to the executive session per Idaho Code 74-206, 1B and 1F. This meeting will not reconvene once that meeting is done.
So moved.
Art made the motion.
Second?
Sandra made the second. And what I will do, I'll start the roll call with Ann Zabala. Ann, you're not on, hon.
There she goes.
I see her lips. She said aye. Okay. Maureen.
Aye.
Gina Tariscio.
Aye.
Sandra.
Aye.
Kelly, Arthur.
Aye.
And Brandy.
Aye.
Okay, we will meet, and we'll adjourn this. It will be a couple of minutes before Zach has us set to go. The other folks have got to be disconnected with Skype, so we'll go into our executive session in like 2 minutes.